Hey, it's Shawn with Kivi. Welcome back to our series on straps and chains. At the beginning of this series, we threatened you with rules. Remember? 393-100 is where the load securement rules start. So we're going to go briefly through those today and talk about some of the ones you have to pay attention to on every load and some of the ones that only apply to certain loads. So with every single load that you haul, you need to meet the 50% aggregate working load limit rule. That one is at 393.106. So that also gives you the differences between direct and indirect fasteners. If you remember, a direct fastener comes only to one side of the trailer and it's attached directly to the cargo or wrapped around the cargo and back to the same side of the trailer. Those you can only count for half the working load limit of whatever fastener that you're using. If you're using indirect fasteners, those go over or through the cargo from one side of the trailer all the way over to the other side of the trailer. Those you can count for full working load limit of whatever fastener that you're using. So if that's going to be a strap, usually 5,400 pounds, chains commonly 6,600 pounds, but whatever the weakest link is in your system, that establishes the working load limit for the whole thing. So once you've met your 50% aggregate working load limit, which means if you had a piece of cargo that weighed 20,000 pounds, you'd have to have at least 10,000 pounds of aggregate working load limit of all the fasteners you have on that particular object. Then you need to think about what it is. If it's general commodities like lumber or building materials or palletized materials, then the amount of trailer space that's taken up by that object is important. Because if that object if you're considering using a single fastener on it, which I would never recommend, it has to be less than 5 feet of trailer space and it has to be less than 1,100 pounds of weight in order for it to even be legal to consider a single fastener. If it's at least 5 feet long but less than 10 feet long, then 2 fasteners is going to be the minimum. And if you have longer objects, then it's going to be 2 for the first 10 feet and 1 for every 10 feet or portion of 10 feet thereafter. So if you had a 42-foot object, for example, 40 is 10 4 times, but the fact that it's 42 feet means you're into a portion, so you have to treat it like it's a 50-foot object, so it would need to have 6 fasteners on it to meet the rule. Okay, so that one's at 393.110 is where the 5-foot rule and the 10-foot rule can be found in your FMCSR. And then another one that comes in commonly with what we haul is the heavy equipment rule. So if something has wheels or tracks and it weighs at least 10,000 pounds, then you can't go by just the 50% aggregate at the low end. You have to have at least 4 separate tie downs. So usually that's going to mean 4 chains and 4 binders, or possibly 2 chains and 4 binders if they're applied correctly. And then as the weight goes up, then you have to think about your 50% aggregate working load limit when you get to heavier objects. But as soon as it gets above 10,000 pounds, then it's 4 tie downs minimum. If you've got something like an excavator that's got a movable attachment, a boom or a bucket or whatever on it, then the fastener that you're using to hold that still doesn't count as one of your 4 tie downs. You have to have 4 tie downs on the machine and then secure the attachment after that. So then also the rule of thumb that's in 393.102 is that whatever you have on your trailer should be secured 50% against movement to the left or to the right. It should be secured 50% against it going off the back end of the trailer. It should be secured at least 20% against lifting or bouncing, and it should be secured 80% against forward movement. Think emergency braking or some kind of light collision. 80% against forward movement. Okay, so that means if you had something that weighed 10,000 pounds, if you hit the brakes on the modern trucks, they're going to give you about 0.6 of a G of braking force. That means that 6,000 pounds of that object are trying to go forward. If you've got 80% securement on, then you're secure against 80% of that 8,000 pounds going forward, and it's going to be pretty secure on your trailer. Keep those rules in mind. Go and study, do your homework. Safe trucking.